Have you ever noticed that being yourself feels easier when nobody else is around? Hmm. That certain parts of you appear naturally in private, but hesitate when other people are present. Hmm. Have you ever left a conversation feeling that you performed well, but did not fully express yourself? Not because you lied, no, not because you were fake, but because something inside you was managing risk. Some people leave social situations energized, others leave exhausted. And they leave exhausted not because they dislike people, no. They leave exhausted because they spent the entire situation monitoring reactions, managing perception, uh, avoiding mistakes, and even preventing disapproval. And eventually, hmm, eventually that exact thing becomes tiring. Not physically, internally. Huh? Most people assume they have confidence problem, but what if they don't? Hmm. What if the issue here is not confidence at all? What if the issue is, in reality, safety? Because before many people learned who they are, they learned how to stay safe. And this is staying safe from criticism, from rejection, from disappointment, from conflict. Safe from being too much, safe from being not enough. And because these lessons arrive early, they rarely announce themselves. They simply become normal. This is not a message about confidence now. This is a message about safety. And there is a difference. Mhm. Most people assume identity comes first. That a person discovers themselves and then learns how to move throughout the world. But often, life unfolds differently. Before many people learned who they were, they learned how to stay safe. How to stay safe from criticism. How to stay safe from rejection. Safe from disappointment. Safe from conflict. Safe from being too much. Safe from being not enough. And because these lessons arrive early, these lessons became normal to that person. You see, children are extraordinary observers because long before they understand psychology, they understand atmosphere. Long before they understand identity, they understand consequence. They learn the they learn what receives approval, what receives criticism, what creates tension, what creates peace, what makes people lean closer, what makes people withdraw. And because belonging matters, especially in young ages, the child adapts. And the child adapts not because the child is weak, no. Because the child is too intelligent. The quiet child learns silence. The expressive child learns restraint. The sensitive child learns armor. The ambitious child learns invisibility. The emotional child learns composure. The creative child learns conformity. And often the adaptation works. And that is why it survives. Because by adapting, the child receives less criticism, less conflict, more acceptance, more safety as well, more belonging. So, the strategy succeeds. And success? Well, success creates loyalty. Because at first, the question is, how do I stay safe? And that is a reasonable question. It is even an intelligent question. Sometimes it is even a necessary question. But over time something subtle happens. The question remains, even when seasons change, even when the environment changes, even when the danger changes. And eventually a person can spend years organizing life around protection without even noticing it. This is exactly where things become difficult. Because adaptation, repeated long enough, begins to feel natural. The strategy becomes familiar. The familiar becomes normal. And the normal becomes, this is just who I am. Wow. Is it though? Or is it who you learned to become? There is a difference, a profound one. Because many people are not expressing themselves. Many people are expressing the version of themselves that once kept them safe. And that version can remain in place for decades. You see, the adaptation solves one problem, yes, but it quietly creates another. Because every hour spent becoming acceptable is an hour that is not spent becoming known to yourself. Every strategy purchased safety, but safety was never free. Something was exchanged. Something was postponed. Something remained unexplored. And eventually, life begins presenting questions that adaptation cannot answer. Questions such as, what do I actually want? What do I actually believe? What do I actually enjoy? Who am I when nobody is watching? Hmm. These questions become surprisingly difficult when selfhood was postponed in favor of safety. Many people believe they are tired because life is demanding. Sometimes they are tired because adaptation is expensive. Monitoring reactions is expensive. Managing perception is expensive. Editing expression is expensive. Interpreting everyone is expensive. Maintaining a version of yourself requires enormous amounts of energy. And eventually the nervous system begins sending invoices. Not because something is wrong, no. Because the cost has been accumulating for years. Safety matters. Of course it does. A child should feel safe. A home should feel safe. A relationship should feel safe. And believe me, safety has value. But safety is a terrible foundation for selfhood. Because the purpose of selfhood is not protection. The purpose of selfhood is expression, embodiment, truth, presence. And these things occasionally require risk. Not recklessness. No. Risk. The risk of being seen. The risk of being honest. The risk of disappointing expectations. The risk of becoming visible. And this is where many people become confused. Because the goal is not to attack adaptation. The adaptation helped. The adaptation protected. The adaptation carried you through seasons you may not have survived otherwise. So, adaptation deserves respect, deserves gratitude. But gratitude and governance are not the same thing. Survival deserves gratitude, yes. It does not deserve authorship. That distinction changes everything. Embodiment does not begin when the person becomes fearless. Embodiment does not begin when the person becomes perfect. No. Embodiment does not begin when all wounds disappear. Embodiment does begin when a person notices the difference. The difference between protection and identity. The difference between adaptation and truth. The difference between survival and selfhood. The moment that distinction becomes visible, something begins returning. Not a new self, no, but the self that was waiting beneath the strategy. And perhaps that is the true cost. Not that you learned how to stay safe, no. That was wisdom. There was intelligence in that. There was even necessity in that. The cost is forgetting that safety was the strategy and mistaking it for the person. Because before many people learned who they were, they learned how to stay safe. And eventually, life asks a different question. It is not, how do I stay safe? It is, who am I when safety is no longer deciding for me? That question marks the, and for those who require positioning beyond what is shared here, there are forms of work that is not conducted in public. Access exists. The strategies that protected you are not necessarily the person you are. Remember that. Because survival deserves gratitude, yes. It does not deserve authorship.